The warrior halted the horse beside a sheltered overhang of stone. He dismounted and lowered her into his arms, cradling her with surprising gentleness for someone who looked carved out of stone in battle. She felt warmth radiate from his skin as he carried her toward a small fire pit already set with dry wood. He must have used this place before. She realized then that he had not been wandering. He had known exactly where to take her. He laid her on a fur blanket near the fire pit, brushed the snow from her hair, then began striking flint against steel. Sparks leapt. Within moments, a small flame flickered to life, growing into a warm, crackling fire that pushed away the icy dread gripping her chest. The sudden warmth made her gasp. Her fingers tingled as blood began to flow again. The warrior crouched beside her, watching closely. His eyes were dark, steady, and sharper than any steel. He touched her wrist lightly, checking her pulse. When he seemed satisfied she was stable enough, he reached into a pack on his horse and brought out a water skin. He lifted her head and let her drink. The water tasted cold and clean. She swallowed slowly, each drop helping her wake a little more. When he spoke again, his English was accented but firm. He asked her name. She tried to answer, her voice soft and raspy. He listened carefully, nodding once when she finally managed to say Liren. He repeated her name as if testing the weight of it. His deep voice made it sound stronger than she felt. She wanted to ask his name in return, but her throat burned. Before she could gather strength to speak, he sat back and placed more wood on the fire. His cloak was dusted with snow, his chest bare, except for the carved stone necklace he wore. Each stone was etched with markings she could not decipher, yet the craftsmanship suggested great meaning. He moved with quiet confidence, like a man who had spent his life learning how to survive places others feared to enter. As the fire grew, she gained enough warmth to stay conscious. Her mind drifted as she watched him work. She thought about the ranch near the foothills where she had lived with her mother before tragedy forced her to leave. She thought about the trip she had been making before the storm caught her. She thought about the fear she felt when she realized she might die alone in the snow. But she had not died. This warrior had found her, saved her. And now he kept watch as if guarding a treasure. The storm outside raged louder, striking the trees with fierce blows. The warrior rose and walked toward the opening of the ravine, scanning the plains again. His posture remained alert, shoulders squared, body poised as though he was ready to fight at any moment. Liren followed his gaze, though from her angle she could see nothing but white darkness. She noticed his hand resting on the handle of the long blade strapped to his hip. He did not draw it, but he kept it close. After a long silence, he returned to the fire and sat near her, but not too close. Respectful distance, she realized. He was careful, thoughtful. She tried again to form words to ask who the riders were. Her voice cracked as she spoke, but he understood enough. He leaned slightly forward, eyes narrowing at the memory of the riders. His tone lowered as he explained that those men were not strangers to him. He did not speak their names, but the way he spoke told her he had faced them before. They were men who roamed the frontier, looking for trouble. Men who believed they could take whatever they wanted simply because no law stood in their way. He had crossed paths with them long ago, and their history had not been peaceful. Liren felt a cold chill crawl up her spine, colder than the storm. If those riders had seen her helpless on the trail, they might have done far worse than the winter. She realized how lucky she had been that the warrior found her first. He studied her face as if trying to read her thoughts. For a moment, his eyes softened, a flicker of concern breaking through his guarded expression. Then he looked away, staring at the flames. She wondered why he traveled alone in such a dangerous storm. Why he had no tribe with him. Why he carried himself like someone used to walking between two worlds. But she knew better than to ask. Not yet. Her strength slowly returned, but her body remained weak. She pulled the fur blanket tighter around herself as the fire cracked. Outside, the wind howled, but inside the ravine she felt cocooned by warmth and uncertainty. It was strange being so close to someone she didn't know, someone so different from the world she came from. Yet she felt safer with him than she had in a long time. The warrior placed a piece of dried meat near her, offering it without speaking. She nodded in thanks and tried to eat, though her hand still shook. He watched the storm again, tense. Hours passed before he finally spoke another word. When he did, his voice was quiet but firm. He told her they could not stay in the ravine for long. The storm would ease by morning, but the riders would not. They would return. They had seen something they wanted. Maybe it was the horse. Maybe it was the warrior. Maybe it was her. Liren felt her heart thumped hard against her ribs as he said this. The mystery of the riders tightened its grip on her mind. What did they want? Why did they watch from a distance instead of striking? What did this warrior know that she did not? He rose again and stood at the mouth of the ravine, snow blowing against him. His silhouette looked larger than life, a lone guardian in a world that had turned cold and wild. She watched him, wondering what path fate had taken to place him in hers, as she drifted between exhaustion and awareness. She sensed something shifting in the air, a new sound, a distant tremor hidden beneath the storm's roar. She lifted her head slightly, trying to listen. The warrior heard it too. His hand moved slowly toward his weapon. Something was coming toward them, and this time the storm would not hide it. The sound grew clearer, steady and heavy, like drums buried under the snow. Liren pushed herself up on her elbows, heart pounding again. The firelight made the stone walls around them glow. But the mouth of the ravine was a black frame cut into the white world outside. The Apache warrior stood there, still as a carved figure, eyes narrowed on whatever moved in the storm. His hand rested on the long blade at his side, the other holding the reins of his horse in case they had to flee in a heartbeat. He glanced back at her once, his gaze sharp and measuring. Then he spoke low and calm, telling her to stay near the fire and not move unless he called. His English was careful, each word chosen like a stone laid in a path. Liren nodded, though her throat was tight. The fear that had softened under the warmth returned. Prickling along her skin, she heard the crunch of hooves first, then the faint clink of metal. Whoever approached was not alone. The warrior stepped forward just enough for the light to catch the edge of his face and the curve of his shoulder. But he did not reveal all of himself. He wanted to see before he was seen. 3 horses came into view, moving slow through the falling snow. Liren recognized their shapes, the broad chests and thick winter coats. The same riders who had watched them earlier. Now they had followed the trail to this place that felt briefly safe. One man raised a hand to shield his eyes from the wind, squinting toward the ravine. Another leaned forward in his saddle, scanning the rocks. His jaw set hard. The warrior stepped out of the shadows just enough that they could see him. Liren heard one of the riders let out a short sound, half laugh and half curse. A familiar tone. They knew him well, and did not sound pleased to find him alive. Thought the storm might have taken you. Da, da, da. The lead rider called, his voice carrying over the wind. Liren heard the name and felt it settle in her mind. Nayati, strong, rough, fitting the man who had saved her. She looked at him with new curiosity, but he did not turn his head. His attention stayed locked on the men. Their leader wore a thick coat lined with fur, the collar pulled up around his neck. His hat sat low on his brow, and a thin scar ran from his cheek to his jaw. Liren recognized him with a jolt. She had seen him once at the trading post, heard the way people dropped their voices when he walked past. His name was Colt Harrow, a rancher who controlled most of the cattle lands south of the river. Some called him a hard worker. Others called him something much darker. Colt smiled, but it held no warmth. You pick a bad night to ride, warrior, he said. Or maybe a good night if a man is looking to disappear. Nayati did not answer right away. The silence stretched, carrying weight. Finally he spoke, voice calm as a winter river. He said he was only passing through, seeking shelter from the snowstorm. He said there was no reason for trouble. Colt's gaze shifted past the Apache, toward the faint glow of fire deeper in the ravine. Liren shrank back, though she knew he could not see her clearly. His eyes narrowed, as if he sensed another presence. Storm's taken more than cattle this winter, Colt replied. Some folks say a wagon went missing up near the foothills. A merchant's daughter on the road alone. Could be dead by now. Could be found by someone who doesn't mind holding a debt over her kin. Liren felt the blood drain from her face. Her journey had not been a secret. Her uncle at the trading post had urged her to travel with others, but she had believed she could make it before the heavy snow came. Colt's words told her that more people knew of her trip than she had realized. If he suspected she was here, helpless and alone, she could easily become a bargaining piece for a man like him. Nayati stepped forward, drawing Colt's attention back to him. His tone hardened as he said there was no woman here, only himself and his horse. He reminded Colt that the valley beyond the ridge belonged to his people, and that wandering too far into it could end poorly. Even for a man with many guns, Colt laughed softly, a sound that carried more threat than humor. "Your people," he echoed. "Haven't seen them much since the soldiers started building that fort by the river. Seems to me you walk alone these days, Nayati. Hard to claim land when a man stands by himself." The tension between them thickened, like the storm itself had drawn closer to listen. Liren realized this was not a new conflict. This was an old wound, bleeding again. Nayati was one of the last of his band ranging freely across this wilderness. Colt was part of the wave of ranchers and traders carving it into property lines. Between them stood unspoken history, past clashes, broken agreements. Nayati's chin lifted a fraction. His voice stayed steady as he said, "The land remembered who walked it first, and that snow covered all tracks the same." He suggested Colt should return to his own camp before night closed in tighter. Colt's smile vanished. The other two riders shifted, hands resting on their rifles. For a moment, Liren feared shots would ring out, echoing off the rocks. Instead, Colt leaned on his saddle horn with a slow, deliberate posture. "Maybe I will ride back," he said. "Storm like this can kill a man, even a tall Apache who thinks he is carved from stone. But if I hear a rumor that the missing girl turned up with you, if I catch even a whisper of it, I will come looking. And I won't come with only 2 riders next time." He tugged on his reins and turned his horse. The others followed, though they kept their eyes on the ravine until the snow swallowed them once more. When the last hoofbeat faded, Nayati stayed where he was, watching the empty trail. Only after several long breaths did he return to the fire. Liren searched his face for some sign of relief, but found only gravity. He moved with controlled calm, yet his jaw was tight, and his shoulders carried new weight. She asked what Colt meant about the missing girl and the debt. Her voice still shook, but her eyes were clear now. She wanted truth, not comforting stories. Nayati took a seat across from her, the flames dancing between them. He said Colt thrived on control. A lost woman on a winter trail was not just a soul in danger. She was a chance to pressure her family, claim land or money, demand loyalty. If Colt suspected she was here, he would not rest. Men like him believed the frontier belonged to whoever held the most fear over others. Liren listened, her heart beating harder with every word. She knew her uncle had enemies. His small trade post stood on valuable ground where ranch trails crossed and Apache hunting routes passed nearby. Some wanted him gone. If Colt thought he could use her against her family, he would come after her with more than warnings. She asked Nayati why he had helped her at all, knowing what trouble it might bring. It was a simple question, but it carried many layers. Why risk angering a powerful rancher for a stranger from another world? Why carry a woman through a snowstorm when he could have turned away and left fate to decide? Nayati looked into the flames for a long time. When he finally answered, his voice was softer, yet firm. He said once long ago a boy from his band had wandered too far during a storm. Soldiers from the fort found the boy and brought him back to their camp instead of letting him die in the cold. They had fed him, given him a blanket, then traded him back to the tribe days later for a promise of peace. Nayati had been that boy. He remembered the feeling of waking in another world, helpless and watched, yet alive. He said a life saved carried weight. It created a thread between people and the land. When he saw Liren lying in the snow, he could not ride past and let the thread break. The words settled deep into her. She saw now that he was not just a warrior, not just a wanderer. He was someone who knew what it meant to owe survival to others, even those from a different side of the frontier. Their stories tangled in ways she did not yet understand. Still, The conflict around them grew larger than any bond forming over a fire. The land itself was a battlefield. Ranchers like Colt claimed rivers and grazing grounds. Soldiers marked lines on maps. Apache families were pushed farther into harsh country, watching their hunting grounds shrink. Niati stood in the middle, carrying the weight of his people's past and the uncertain future ahead. Liren carried her own burdens. Her mother had died the previous spring, leaving her and her younger brother under the care of their strict uncle at the trading post. He believed alliances with men like Colt were necessary for survival. She believed some prices were too high. Their arguments had grown bitter, especially when someone began driving cattle through their small patch of land without permission. Tracks had been found, fences cut. No one claimed responsibility, but many suspected Colt. She had been on her way to her uncle to warn him that. Others in the nearby town were speaking of selling to Colt rather than risk his anger. She feared he would stand alone and be crushed under the weight of his pride, just as Niati feared for his people. Now her journey had twisted into something else. She was no longer simply a niece carrying news. She had become a piece in a dangerous game between the rancher and the Apache warrior. As the fire burned low, Niati told her they would move at first light. He planned to take her north, away from Colt's usual paths, through country only he knew well. From there, they could decide whether to reach her uncle's post or seek another shelter first. He spoke like a man used to making plans on the run, always expecting something to go wrong. Liren nodded, though the thought of leaving this small pocket of warmth frightened her. She asked if his people would help them, if they could find safety among his band. A shadow crossed his face. He told her his band had been forced deeper into the mountains after a clash with soldiers. He rode alone now, carrying messages and trading news. To bring a white woman into their camp would stir trouble on all sides. That answer opened another angle to their shared conflict. Even if she trusted him, even if he trusted her, the world around them did not. Old wounds and new grudges wrapped around every decision. Any step they took would leave a trail for someone to follow. Outside, the wind shifted. The storm began to ease, but with that calm came a new unease. Hoof tracks in the softening snow would be easier to follow. Gunshots would travel farther. The wild quiet of the night felt watched, as if the land itself waited to see what these two unlikely companions would choose. Niati rose and added more wood to the fire, its profile lit in orange light. Liren watched him, feeling fear and a strange thread of trust twist together inside her chest. She realized that ever since he had lifted her from the snow, her fate had tied itself to his in ways neither of them could untangle. As she lay back on the fur blanket, trying to steal a few hours of restless sleep, one thought kept her awake. Colt Haro now had a reason to hunt Niati. If he learned that she truly was the missing traveler he hinted at, he would not stop until he found them. And somewhere out in the dark, beyond the soft crackle of the fire, a single distant sound rose on the wind. It was faint, yet clear enough to reach the ravine. The long call of a whistle, the kind ranch riders used to signal each other across open land. Niati's head snapped up. He met Liren's eyes across the fading glow of the flames. They were no longer alone in the night. The whistle echoed across the frozen plain, like a thin blade slicing through the night. Liren felt her heartbeat jump as the sound faded into the wind. Niati stood perfectly still, listening with a sharpness that told her the whistle wasn't random. It was a signal, a warning, or a call to gather. Whatever it meant, it was meant for men like Colt Haro, not for travelers seeking peace in the storm. The fire crackled behind her, the only warmth in the ravine, but she suddenly felt exposed, as if the rocks around them did nothing to hide them from watching eyes. Niati stepped away from the entrance and returned to her side. His expression was calm, but the tension in his shoulders revealed the truth. He did not feel safe here anymore. He told her they had to leave before the riders pinned them in the ravine. He moved quickly, putting out the fire with handfuls of snow, stomping over the embers until the last orange glow disappeared. Darkness fell heavily around them, broken only by the weak light of the moon slipping through the drifting clouds. Liren pulled the fur blanket around her and forced herself to stand. swaying slightly as the cold bit through the weak warmth she had gained. Niati caught her arm, steadying her with a light touch. He lifted her onto the horse again, but this time his movements were more hurried, his eyes constantly scanning the trail behind them. Before climbing up behind her, he pulled a leather strap across the horse's chest to silence any loose metal. Colt's men had sharper hearing than most believed, and Niati planned to leave no hint of sound for them to track. They set off into the trees, moving slowly at first so the horse wouldn't crunch branches louder than the wind. Liren leaned back against him, both to keep her balance and to absorb the warmth of his chest. She felt the steady rise and fall of his breath as he guided them north. She remembered he had said the land beyond the ridge belonged to his people. But if his band had moved deeper into the mountains, that meant they were traveling through a border that no one fully controlled anymore. The forest thickened around them, the branches heavy with ice, the air cold enough to sting their cheeks. Liren forced herself to stay awake, even as exhaustion pulled at her eyes. She didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to fall asleep and wake too late to warn him of danger. Every sound, the flutter of branches, the distant groan of trees bending under snow made her tense. After a long stretch of silence, Niati shifted slightly and spoke in a low whisper. He told her that Colt would not stop after one warning. Men like him pushed until they broke something or someone. Liren thought of the scar on Colt's face. The stories of cowhands who vanished after angering him, the way people lowered their voices when he passed through town. She wondered why the frontier made some men kinder and others colder than winter itself. Niati told her that the land always showed the truth of a person. The wild did not change a man, it revealed him. She believed him. The way he carried her, the way he protected her without asking anything, the way he faced danger without fear, all of it told her who he was long before he said his name. They rode for what felt like hours, though the moon barely shifted in the sky. The storm had softened two thin flakes, drifting down like quiet whispers. But the silence now felt heavy, almost expectant. Liren kept glancing behind them, imagining shapes moving between the trees. At last, Niati slowed the horse and turned slightly east, toward a narrow trail winding between steep rocks. He leaned closer and told her there was a creek ahead, mostly frozen this time of year. If they moved carefully across its surface, their tracks would disappear. She nodded, holding tighter as the horse picked its way down a slope and onto a sheet of pale ice dusted lightly with snow. The ice groaned beneath them, long, low sounds that made her breath catch each time. Niati kept the horse moving steady, slow but confident. She watched the shadows ahead, trying not to look down at the cracked patterns running beneath the surface. The sound of the ice shifting echoed far into the night. When they reached the opposite bank, Niati guided the horse up a narrow rise. From there, they could see across the valley they had left behind. A faint glow appeared on the far-end torchlight, 3 of them moving in a slow line. Liren felt her stomach twist. They followed, she whispered. Niati nodded once. He said Colt's men were skilled trackers, trained by necessity and greed. The storm slowed them, but did not stop them. He clicked his tongue softly, urging the horse forward again. They had to keep moving or risk being cornered. As they climbed higher, the terrain grew harsher. The ground tilted sharply, rocks jutting from the earth like broken ribs. The trees grew sparse, revealing long stretches of snow that reflected the moonlight like glass. Liren trembled as wind cut sharper across the open space. Niati pulled his fur cloak around her shoulders without hesitation, leaving himself exposed to the cold. She protested, but he silenced her with a firm shake of his head. They traveled until they reached a ridge so steep the horse hesitated. Niati dismounted and helped her down gently. He stroked the horse's neck, speaking softly to calm it. Then he guided them on foot along a narrow ledge carved by centuries of wind and small avalanches. Liren felt the ground crumble once beneath her boots, but Niati caught her quickly, pulling her back with strong hands. The higher they climbed, the clearer the valley became in the moonlight. Liren turned and saw lanterns moving again more than before. Colt's men had split into 2 groups, sweeping wide across the lower trails. Her breath tightened when she realized they were closing the distance. Niati saw it too. He increased their pace. leading her toward a rocky outcrop near the top of the ridge. When they reached it, Liren froze beside him. He crouched low, studying the snow ahead. She followed his gaze and saw faint hoofprints, but older, partially filled with fresh snow. And beside them, footprints. Several, they had not been the only travelers to pass through here recently. Nayadi's expression sharpened. He whispered that the tracks belonged not to Colt, but to a band of trappers who roamed these mountains every winter. These men were unpredictable, often desperate, and not known for kindness. They set traps and claimed whatever they found, foxes, deer, or people. Liren's heart throbbed painfully. They had escaped one threat only to stumble into another. He told her they must move to the cliff overlook, where the land opened into a flat clearing. From there, he could find a safer route down the other side of the mountain. But before he could take a step, the faint snap of a twig echoed from behind a cluster of pines. Nayadi pushed Liren gently behind him. She gripped his cloak, peering around him as shapes emerged from the trees. Rough white fur coats, heavy boots, rifles slung across backs, trappers, 5 of them fanning out slowly, as if they were stalking prey. Their leader, a tall man with frost in his beard, stepped forward with a smirk that chilled Liren more than the wind. "Well, now," he said, "look what the storm blew in." Nayadi kept his stance steady, offering no aggression, but no surrender. The leader's eyes narrowed when he saw Liren, taking in her pale face and the way she clung to the warrior. He muttered something to the men behind him. Their expressions shifted to something Liren recognized: calculating interest. Nayadi stepped forward, shielding her completely. His voice remained calm as he told the trappers they meant no trouble and only needed to pass through. The leader laughed, shaking his head. He said snowstorms didn't bring luck often, but tonight he felt fortune in the air. A lone Apache with a wounded woman was exactly the kind of prize men like him dreamed of trading. Liren's heart hammered. Her fingers tightened on Nayadi's cloak. He took one slow breath, the kind a man takes when he knows words no longer matter. His hand drifted toward his blade. The trappers noticed. Rifles lifted a little. Faces hardened before either side could move. A distant echo rose from the valley below. Hoofbeats, loud ones, many. Liren turned toward the sound. Lanterns were climbing the mountain trail. Colt's riders. The trap had closed from both directions. Nayadi's jaw tightened. He looked at the trappers, then the approaching riders, then down at Liren, who stared up at him with fear she could no longer hide. They were surrounded with no clear path to escape. The wind howled through the pines, sending loose snow swirling around them. Somewhere in that chaos, Nayadi made a decision. She saw it in the sharp set of his eyes, the sudden strength in his posture. He tightened his grip on her arm and whispered that no matter what happened next, she must stay behind him. The trappers raised their rifles. Colt's men climbed nearer every second. Snow whipped across the ridge as the world narrowed to this one moment, and with danger closing in from all sides. The warriors stepped forward, ready to face the storm gathering around them. The ridge shook under the weight of hooves climbing fast from below. Lanterns swayed like restless fireflies as Colt Harrow's riders pushed upward, their shadows flickering across the snow like a warning carried by the wind. In front of Liren and Nayadi, the trappers tightened their stance, rifles ready, breath rising in cold bursts. The storm had eased, but the tension in the air thickened like nightfall closing in early. Liren felt her heartbeat in her throat as Nayadi moved in front of her, blocking her from both dangers at once. His presence steadied her, even as fear clawed up her spine. The trapper's leader lifted his chin, his eyes narrowing with the calculating look of a man who weighed profit above reason. "Looks like you've got 2 problems tonight, Apache," he said. "Tell you what, hand over the girl, and we'll let you walk off that cliff on your own terms." Nayadi didn't speak. His silence was sharper than any threat. Liren could feel the storm inside him even though his face stayed calm. His hand gripped his blade, steady as stone. Behind them, the thunder of hooves grew louder. Colt's voice boomed through the trees, ordering his men to spread out across the ridge. He didn't speak like someone who feared either the mountain or the men on it. He spoke like he owned the night, The trappers turned, startled by how fast the riders approached. For a moment, uncertainty flickered between them. Colt's men were more in number and more heavily armed. The trappers weren't used to sharing prey. Colt rode up with 6 men behind him, each armed with rifles. Snow sprayed under their horses' hooves as they stopped at the ridge's edge. Colt's cold eyes scanned the scene, lingering on Niadi, then narrowing on Liren. His expression sharpened when he recognized her. Proof that she was alive only fueled the greed in his stare. "Well now," Colt said, guiding his horse forward. "I figured you'd died in that storm, girl. Must be my lucky winter after all." Liren's fingers dug into the back of Niadi's coat as fear tightened her breath. Colt wasn't one to hide his plans. Whatever he wanted with her had nothing to do with helping her family and everything to do with owning them. Niadi stepped slightly to the side, letting Colt see just enough of Liren to make his intentions clear but not enough to reach her. Colt clicked his tongue, amused. "You've got spirit," Colt said to Niadi, "but you're a dead man if you think you can walk off this ridge with her." The trappers shifted restlessly, raising their rifles higher. Colt glared at them. "She's mine." "Stand aside," trapper leader spat into the snow. "Not how deals work here, rancher. We found them first." The two sides squared off. The air grew sharp, filled with the tension of men hungry for control. Liren knew that one gunshot could unleash chaos in the mountains. Niadi stood calm at the center, like a rooted tree bracing against a storm, but refusing to bow. He turned his head slightly toward Liren, lowering his voice so only she could hear. He told her to trust him, no matter what happened in the next moment. Before she could ask what he meant, Niadi stepped forward with both hands raised, not in surrender, but in command. His voice carried across the ridge with a strength that surprised even the trappers. He spoke of the frozen creek they had crossed, of the weakened ice he had studied carefully. He said anyone who rushed down that trail the only way off the ridge quickly would break through to the deep water below. He warned them that a single wrong step would swallow man and horse. Both Colt's men and the trappers froze. Fear of the land was stronger than fear of bullets. The ridge suddenly felt thinner beneath their feet. Niadi pointed toward a different trail leading through a dense patch of pines, a path that curved but was safe if taken slowly. He said all of them could leave alive if they took that route. It was the first time Colt's face shifted. Distrust flickered across his features. He didn't expect an Apache warrior to offer a way out. One of his riders muttered that they should test the ice themselves, but the creek below gave a low groan, long and hollow, like the mountain itself, warning them. The trappers argued quietly among themselves. Danger pushed them closer to reason than greed could. Finally, the trapper leader lowered his rifle slightly. "Fine," he said, "but we're not leaving empty-handed." Niadi moved faster than Liren expected. He threw a leather pouch into the snow near the trapper's feet. Hard metal clinked. Silver trade coins from his pack. A heavy gift for safe passage. The trappers looked at each other, tempted more by certain wealth than the risk of facing Colt's armed men. The leader pocketed the pouch and gave a stiff nod. "We'll take the pine trail. You deal with your ranch problem." They retreated, their boots crunching in the snow as they vanished into the trees. Now only Colt and his riders remained. Colt dismounted, boots sinking into the snow. He moved slowly, confident in his numbers. "You think buying off trappers changes anything?" he said. "Give me the girl, and you can go back to whatever cave you came from." Liren stepped out from behind Niadi before he could stop her. Her voice was clear, though her hands trembled. She told Colt she would never go with him, no matter what threats he made. She said her uncle would rather burn his trading post to the ground than surrender to a man who used fear as law. Colt's eyes hardened. Brave words for someone half frozen. Niadi shifted slightly, ready to move if Colt reached for her. His presence beside her made her feel stronger. She continued speaking, saying if Colt took her by force, every homesteader and trader in the valley would turn against him. She said townsfolk whispered already about missing cattle and broken deals. She told him he'd lose more than he gained. Colt's jaw clenched at the truth. His own men glanced at each other, uneasy. They had families in those towns, They lived by those rumors. Nay took advantage of their hesitation. He stepped between Colt and Liren and raised his voice once more. He said the snowstorm had given them all a chance to walk away without bloodshed, that if they continued this pursuit, the valley would remember their cruelty. The mountains would remember, and no one escaped the judgment of the land forever. Something in his voice struck deeper than anger. Even Colt sensed it. A long pause hung heavy in the cold air. Finally, Colt stepped back, frustration flashing across his face. He signaled his men to mount. "You've won tonight," he muttered. "But winter ends, and when it does, this valley will still be mine." He turned his horse sharply and rode downhill, his riders following in a slow, tense line. Lanterns faded until the ridge was dark once more. Liren let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her knees weakened, and Niati steadied her gently. He said they had to keep moving, but the danger had passed for now. She nodded, gripping his hand. They crossed the ridge and descended through the pines using the safe trail. Dawn slowly broke behind the mountain, casting gold light across the snow. The world felt new, washed clean by the storm and all they had survived. When they reached a wide clearing, Niati stopped. Below them lay the valley stretching toward the trading post. Smoke rose from chimneys, calm and peaceful. Liren felt emotion well in her chest as she realized she would see her family again. She turned to him, touched by the quiet strength in his eyes. She asked if he would come with her. She wanted him there, not just as a savior, but as someone whose presence had become a steady warmth in her life. He hesitated, then nodded softly. He said her path had crossed his for a reason. Sometimes the land guided people toward the same fire. They rode down the mountain together. As they neared the trading post, townsfolk stepped out to greet them, astonished she was alive. Her uncle rushed forward, overcome with relief. When he learned what Niati had done, he offered thanks with a sincerity deeper than words. In time, the valley learned the truth about the storm, the trappers, and Colt's pursuit. People began standing together more firmly, refusing to be divided by fear. Meanwhile, Liren and Niati found their place in each other's world, building trust day by day. Their bond grew from survival into something steady and warm. Like a fire that refused to die in winter, the mountains kept their secrets. But the land remembered the courage of a towering Apache, saved a woman abandoned in a snowstorm, and changed the course of her life. And though the frontier still carried dangers, hope rose brighter than fear as the two walked forward, side by side toward a future the storm could not take from them.